started. So yeah, Cyril Le Roux, thanks for taking the time today to join me for the conversation. So 20 years experience across various industries. I think currently you're the founder and CEO at Productity. So deliver a range of tailored training, consulting, coaching work, as well as operating as a fractional CPO from time to time. You're also a trainer with Product Focus and Maestro. Previously, VP of Product Management and various heads of product roles, interim roles, and a few highlights which I pulled out from your LinkedIn. So I think the reinvention of the Zoopla app, so reversing a negative trend in growth, I think is really interesting, something I'd like to dive into a bit more. Overseeing a launch of a neobank in less than a year, which is pretty impressive. And I also saw you have your private pilot license, which I personally think is the most impressive achievement. But yeah, how do you describe what you do to people, and yeah, how would you describe your journey into product management and where you are today?
So explaining what you do as a product manager to people who don't know what a product manager is, I think we've all been there. It's quite difficult. The things that led me to product management, Steve Jobs said that you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. And that's pretty much what happened in my case. I was, a 15-year-old who loved tech and writing software for my dad's company. That was my probably first job. I was paid in windsurfing gear. It was a great deal for me. And then the first job paid with real money was building custom PCs. And this is those two experiences were about understanding customer needs and then matching it with a product. And I took a lot of interest into making sure that whatever is built or whatever is designed really matches the needs of the person for whom it's intended. And then I had those are two things that really were a little bit of product management before I even knew that it was product management. But then the next thing was a little bit different. My first real proper corporate job was doing tech support for a company. And this is where, it's going to come out as being pretty old. You may remember, some of you will remember the days when you had to connect to the internet through a dial-up modem. Well, I was a tech support engineer getting phone calls from people who are trying to connect their modem. And my flex at the time was to be able to listen to the connection and troubleshoot and know exactly what was going on. So that was a skill that was useful for about 10 seconds. And now it's a curse, because when you're watching an old movie and you have that hacker say, "I'm in," and you've heard the connection behind says, "No, that was a fax you connected to. You're not going to get anything out of this." It's a bit of it ruins it, really. But what was interesting in that experience is that I found modems really difficult to use. And especially if you wanted to do anything more clever than connecting to the internet, customers were struggling. And I thought there's got to be an easier way of handling this. And I took upon myself to write a little bit of software that would help customers of the company that I was working for at the time to actually configure their modem through a graphical user interface, a GUI. And eventually headquarters got wind of what was happening there. They liked it. And a little bit of QA would put in the CD that was shipped with all the units at the time. But that was, you see, a different angle into product management. It was really about trying to fix a problem, make something easier to use than was the case at the time. So a few years later, I was working for British Telecom. I was sitting alongside a product manager, and I really liked what he was doing. I really thought this would really be the sort of thing I would love to do. And when he had to leave to go back to Australia, he managed to convince his boss that I could be a good replacement for that job. And that was my very first job as a product manager. So as you said, after that, I worked for companies like Photobox, Zoopla, and ended up spending about 10 years in product leadership in the different roles that you mentioned. And about 2 years ago, I decided that it was time for a change. And reflecting on the things that I got the most satisfaction out of my career, I realized that helping people grow was one of the things that I really, really enjoyed. So decided to start my own company around a mission to fill the world with delightful products, one team at a time, and focusing on training, consulting, coaching, and fractional. Plus a little bit of time for my own product, because you can't really take the product management instincts out of what you're doing. So that's my
nice.
journey.
And that's one of the reasons that I have worked for myself for a number of years, is to be able to work on my own projects as well as delivering client work. And one of the questions I do get from time to time, especially when you're working in companies and people look at the product team and they're like, oh, I'd like to be involved in that, is how do I get involved? And it does seem that quite a common path into product is through customer support, customer success. And it seems to be because they have such an intimate understanding of the problems that people are facing day to day, which is probably the hardest thing to get a grip on as a product manager if you're not on the front line. So it does seem like a natural evolution.
It builds on empathy, really. If you've been on the receiving end of customers who are really struggling, you feel their pain, you want to fix it. And some of the best product managers I had the privilege of training actually did come from customer services.
Yeah, definitely. So, well, you're experiencing some success. You're doing some really good work, within a full-time role. Why did you decide to take the leap and go self-employed? And how have you found it so far? Like, certainly when I did it, I had an idea of, oh, I'll be my own boss and everything will be great and I'll be on a beach and I'll be making loads of money. And, there's been good times, there's been hard times, but, it's the grass can always be greener. But why did you do it and how have you found it so far?
Well, just between you and I, right? Let's not share that too far out.
Yeah.
It's just a podcast, right? After I left my last role, and when I was talking about, what I was motivated by and what I wanted to do, a lot of people surprised me and said, sounds like you were burning out. I thought, oh, surely not. I wasn't burning out. But the idea stuck, and I realized, actually, maybe I was. Maybe I was getting there. Maybe I wasn't there already burnt out, but I was getting there gradually. So, as we all know, when Marty Kagan writes in the intro of Inspired that product management is a full-on role. You hardly can get on top of it with 70 hours a week. That's the reality, and it can be pretty lonely sometimes, because and it's something that I teach when I teach product managers. I get them to expect that no one knows how busy you really are, not even your boss. I do remember a little anecdote on this. I went back to my boss at Zoopla, the one I followed over to, my boss at Photobox that I followed over at Zoopla. But at the time I was at Photobox, I went to him and say, "I'm boss, I'm too busy. There's too much going on. I'm really stressed out. There's got to be something that we got to do." And I remember looking at me saying, "Sounds like you're doing it wrong." And okay, so we found a few ways of managing my workload, and then probably 5 years later, I was on the other side of that table. The product manager came to me and said exactly the same thing that I was saying, and I realized that even if you've been there, you can't you don't fully understand how busy a product manager is, and it's the same for the leadership. In my last role, I was building and operating at the same time. Building because most of the product team had to be rebuilt. So there's a lot of hiring that needs to be done, a lot of processes that need to be put in place, trying to drive the first principles, value driven, outcome driven, rather than just taking a list of features to build. And at the same time, managing the strategy, managing the direction, all of that was pretty full on. And what I learned out of that experience is that if you're going to build and operate at the same time, you really need to be careful about how much of the strategy you're going to take over from the C-suite, because there's probably a limit on how much you can take if you're rebuilding the team at the same time. So that was probably in the back of my head. I needed to do something different, and I needed a little bit of a change of lifestyle. And I had started doing some training with Product Focus and Maestro as well, which is a company in France. And I really enjoyed doing that. And I thought that will sustain me while I grow other areas of the business, which is where I am right now.
How did the opportunities with Product Focus and Maestro come up?
Very organically, really. With Maestro, there was, when I was working for Zoopla, we decided to go and meet people at a company called Se Loger, which is a French large property portal, and meet their product managers, discuss the problems they have, how they're solving it. So I made quite a few connections there with product managers based in France. And just following up with them on a number of different things. I realized that one of them was teaching at Maestro. So I told him, that's interesting. What is it that you're doing? Initially, he was doing a lecture on strategy, and I thought, I'd love to hear that. It sounds very interesting. And he said, well, wait a minute, you probably should teach there as well. So, let me put you in touch with them, and we'll see if there's a common interest. So it happened organically like that. Product Focus, not so much. I just sent them a line saying, hey, I think we could do things together. Can we have a chat? And I ended up talking to one of the founders, and maybe not, maybe let's see. So I went through one of their trainings, made a lot of notes, came back, fed back on what I thought the training was doing well, perhaps things we could improve, and then ended up doing some modules and being gradually brought on board with that. It's a great company. It's European leader in product management training, and it gets excellent ratings. Every cohort is generally, from an NPS perspective, very, very high. So it's a great company to work with.
I've seen a couple of your webinars that you've delivered through Product Focus. I think they're probably the free ones that I think then obviously leads into the paid programs. Yeah, seems really good from what I've seen. And you talked about using that work to help sustain and transition you into working for yourself, self-employed, Productity.
Mm-hmm.
What other sort of marketing and sales strategies are you working on? Are you trying? What have you tried and what's worked well? What have you tried and hasn't worked so well, maybe?
So you have to recognize what you're good at and what you're not so good at. Marketing is not my strength. I'll just say like that. So I use the marketing agency now to manage campaigns, to generate conversations, and get in front of leaders who would potentially need my support. And I found that pretty effective. The other ways of finding work, of course, is recommendation. So when you talk to other to consultants and fractional leaders, more often than not, they get work through recommendation. And for me, it still is the majority of where I'm getting my work from. So people who I've worked with, people who know me from other lines of work, and suggesting we talk, and then one thing leads to another. It's usually a fairly long process as well. As in, it's not you get a phone call on Monday and the contract is signed on Friday. It takes months. So you have to be patient. You have to be patient. If you're a product manager and you're thinking of making that transition, the fact that you're in product management suggests that you already have all the skills to be able to do this sort of thing. But it takes time. So you just need to be patient and grow this steadily up until you reach that point where you can just do that and nothing else. It's also about understanding your niche. So it's a bit meta, but of course you're then the product. So you need to manage yourself as a product, meaning you need to understand what problem you're addressing, how you're going to talk about it, who is interested with the problem that you're addressing, and then have a strategy to get in front of these people. It's very important because if you've had a diverse experience, I mean, I worked at large organizations like British Telecom, at relatively big scale-ups, but also in very small startups. So, I feel I can flex and go up and down and do B2B, B2C, B2B2C, but you need to have a clear positioning if you need your voice to get out there. So you will need to pick one of those things and then communicate on that. Even if you can do other things, you still need to decide where you're going to create a particular reputation. It doesn't mean you will only do that, because you'll get recommended and do other things. I ended up with a client last year. I started helping them on product management, ended up doing some help also on OKRs, because I knew enough about it to help them organize a cycle of OKRs. But I would never sell myself as an OKR expert. So it's about getting a clear positioning, getting a clear differentiator, something that you will communicate on.
Definitely. And whether it's intentional or accidental, I'm still not sure myself. Like you said, in terms of looking back, it's easier. But when I was doing some contract work in product, I was also building a couple of little side projects in the sort of health and wellness, nutrition space. So I had that sort of startup experience in the sort of the health and nutrition experience. So I was quite easily able to land a couple of paying gigs because with startups and scale-ups in health tech, because they saw my CV. They were a founder themselves. The person who was doing some of the hiring was a founder. One of the first product hires. They liked me because I'd done the product stuff, I'd done the startup stuff, and they could relate to it. They're like, yeah, Liam's the guy that is doing that. And it was a little bit accidental. What would you say do you?
Well, it's I think it's where I have the most scar tissue. And where I definitely have the more scar tissue is helping organizations that have outgrown the startup model. Sorry, helping startup that have outgrown the startup model, where the CEO is in charge of everything. I mean, if you're in a startup and you're a product manager, you shouldn't kid yourself that you're, the CEO of the product, because it's a startup and the CEO is probably the person who is having the most influence on the product. Your role is to execute on their vision and then absorb as much of the knowledge of the domain as possible, so that as the company grows, you will be the natural leader of the product function when the CEO no longer has enough time to cover everything. So the problem is that people tend to continue doing what made them successful up to that point. And if what made the CEO successful was to be very hands-on with the product team or team, sometimes there's already two teams in place, then it's very hard for them to let go. And in a similar fashion, if the product manager has been very successful up to that point by just taking a list of features that need to be built and try to build them the best way possible, then the natural tendency is to continue doing exactly that and not really wander in familiar territory of doing discovery and doing interviews and talking to people about the problems, never mentioning the product. That is a bit weird. So this is where I'm focusing. I'm helping organizations who got up to that point, because this is where, again, I have more scar tissue. I found a lot of ways that don't work, but I have found now a few that work really well, and this is where I'm helping now organizations grow up to that, past that hurdle, if you will.
Yeah, makes sense. I think, very much. I think it aligns with us at a certain point. I think that's ultimately what is the difference when someone hires someone externally or doesn't sometimes. I think just sort of going on from what you were just talking about, what would you say are the most common or the biggest, I don't know, you can pick one or both, challenges that you hear when you're speaking to, it could be a product leader or a business leader, maybe, let's say, it could be the CEO of a startup or a product leader in a larger organization, but the sort of typical client, what would you say are the biggest challenges that you're hearing at the moment are?
There's a few things that tend to happen. From a leadership perspective, the product team just doesn't get it. They don't make decisions that I can trust. From this leader's perspective, they're trying very hard to guide them and give them some degree of autonomy, but it's just not happening, and therefore it looks like it's locked, and that's because there's a number of different reasons behind that. One of them, which I think is more often than not where the problem is that there is a vision that the CEO has, very clear vision in their head, but it's not as crisp in other people's head. So where they want to go and how the world will look when they've accomplished their mission, it's not as clear. So what I'm helping companies and C-suite execs do is to try to crystallize in terms that the team, the engineers, the product designer, the product manager will understand and be able to own. So a very clear vision of the end product. Then what is then the next biggest thing missing is domain knowledge on the part of the product person. I would say product people, because it could be the product designer as well. And as a result, even if they know the destination, they're not really able to make a good decision because they don't understand enough about the industry. So that, the issue here, or the challenge to get the product manager, the product designer, spend more time out of the building, talking to customers, talking to industry specialists, educate themselves, and get to a point where they become the subject matter expert in that area. And their aim should be to actually know more than the CEO in that area, because the CEO will have less and less time to focus on that level of detail. There will be hopefully multiple teams that will be working in different areas, and therefore the product manager for each team needs to be the subject matter expert. If you're not the subject matter expert, if somebody else knows more than the domain in your area, you still have some work to do to be able to get there. So once you are at that stage, you have enough credibility that the CEO can start trusting you a little bit more. And if they disagree, you can demonstrate, it's KYN, right? Know your numbers. You can pull the number of figures that demonstrate why you're thinking in this particular way and why you're convinced that your option is the way to go. So those are the key issues that I tend to see.
Yeah, I think that whole clip, I think, is a really nice soundbite that you've just delivered. I think, the idea that if you boil it down as a product, you think about your first, people talk about your 30, 60, 90 days, even if you talk about your first year as a product person in a new organization, if you can become the go-to person for that area, I think that is a successful sort of milestone as a product person. And like you said, that in my experience is the only way to really build trust, or for other people to really trust you to get on with your job. And then people talk about empowerment and all of that stuff as a product person, and having not feeling empowered, etc. But if you can demonstrate that you know a load of stuff and you're speaking to more customers than other people are speaking to, you have a better handle on the data than other people, that will foster that trust and autonomy that I think a lot of people feel like they want or deserve. I think the vision piece you talk about as well.
Yeah.
Oh, go on.
I was saying there's perhaps something else that I often see missing as well, which is an explicit product strategy. Now, that doesn't matter so much if you're in a startup, because product strategy, company strategy would probably be very, very close. But if you're in a multi-product company, then you need to have your own product vision. You need to have your own strategy as well. And that strategy needs to be explicit. If you want the stakeholders, the senior stakeholders in the organization to trust you, you need to explain to them how you're thinking about this. So to go back to the Zoopla example, right? So we had a shared domain knowledge on what's it like to move in the UK, and also what's it like to be an estate agent. But the strategy was, we're going to make users prefer Zoopla over Rightmove by giving them tools that are not immediately connected to what we have considered so far to be our primary mission. Primary mission being, give us a postcode, a radius, and a price range. Tell us whether it's a flat or a house, rental, or a property to buy, and we'll give you a bunch of listings. That was the mission. And what we said was, well, we're going to have to go beyond that now. And hopefully the people who are in areas where there is a little bit less than on Rightmove, but not dramatically less, those will manage to flip over. And the estate agent will see the response. And as a result, they will keep their contract, and might actually encourage others, or they might extend the number of agencies from their network to go over to Zoopla. And that will reverse the trend. So we needed to explain that this was the strategy. That was how we were going to link A to B. You need people to then either let you do it, or let you at least go as far as doing an experiment that will prove whether that works or not. And but it needs to be explicit, because otherwise you just turn up into a roadmap meeting and saying, we're going to give some going to give users some advice. They look at you and says, what are you doing? Why? Shouldn't you focus on SEO?
Yeah, I think context is everything. And I think, like zooming out from what you were saying, and actually I think you started by saying it, in a startup perhaps, the vision is perhaps the CEOs or the startup founders. And as a product person, maybe you don't necessarily own the vision in the way that it's written about in a lot of blog posts that sort of bastardizing some of, say, Marty Kagan's work or writing. Whereas in a more mature organization or multi-product organization, there will probably be a bit more ownership of those things. And I think, personally, I feel like that's not discussed enough in terms of the expectations going into a product role. I'm still relatively junior in terms of, product specific work. Well, junior, but I haven't done it for decades. So understanding what is expected given the context isn't always clear. And I think the people hiring product people aren't always clear either. So you'll see job descriptions where it's saying you'll own the vision, the strategy, when in fact you don't, and you never will. And actually, it's more about execution and actually becoming an SME and being trusted whereas there's other times that you will need to own that. And I think that is a really challenging part, both on the hirer, the hiring manager, but also the person going into the job and just setting people up for success. But sort of talking a bit more about product managers themselves now, I suppose, rather than the clients and the organizations. You've talked a little bit about managing burnout and stress and things, and you mentioned that you do coach and you enjoy sort of working with product people. What are some of the other stresses, or when you're maybe when you're delivering training, what are some of the core points that you try to get across when you're delivering training, maybe more to the product teams, individuals themselves, as opposed to, you know, the client organization, if that makes sense?
There is an oral tradition of product management, just like there is an oral tradition of Scrum, you know, where some people think they're doing Scrum because they were part of the team that was doing Scrum. So, you know, and whatever the team was doing, they are now replicating in a new company because they believe that's what the book says. And, you know, it becomes very dogmatic. And you realize that no one actually even read the Scrum guide, or at least the latest version. No one even realizes that the Scrum guide, the Scrum as a method, evolves all the time. So it's kind of the same with product management. You have an oral tradition of product management because even though it's now a lot more mature than it used to be, it's not as old a profession as being an accountant, right? Or salesperson or a marketing person. So as a result of that, what is product management is where we start in the training and demonstrate the whole spectrum of activities that need to take place, and the mindset, the knowledge that you need to have to take a product from A to B. So that's quite often the foundation that needs to be laid. And then depending on the sort of organization that you're dealing with and where people work, you will have a number of different things. There's the age-old debate of whether you're a PO, PM, a PM doing PO work, a PO doing PM work. You know, it's confusing. So, you know, try to bring some clarity to this and saying, well, PO, it was intended as a product manager role. If you actually read the Scrum guide, the PO makes decisions that the organization should respect. Sounds a lot like a product management role to me, but the PO role doesn't describe what they do to come up with good ideas in the first place. So, because that is outside of the scope, a lot of people have thought, well, the PO is the guy who's the person who is dealing with the engineers, and there is somebody who needs to bring what the solution is. That's got to be a PM. So I've always tried to reject that approach, and even though I understand there's a bit of a workload issue here that we have to recognize, doing both is actually exhausting if you have a big team. So one of the things that I'm trying to suggest ways of looking at this is that the product owner role is just one of the roles that the product manager needs to do. Just like when you're a product manager, there's a bit of project management that you need to do. You can't completely get away from that. There's a little bit of synchronizing and sequencing that needs to be done. So it's one of the roles, but it's more than just being a PO. And then the users, the product manager also needs to understand that they have to maintain their authority. So they all want the autonomy. They want to be able to decide what they're going to do, but there's a limit to what you can do if you're not self-funded. So managing a contract with the leadership on what is the scope that the team is able to do. And for instance, I had some teams that said, well, we're an autonomous squad. Surely we can decide whether we're doing Scrum, Kanban, Scrumban, or any other combination. And I said, well, yeah, in theory, but you know what? If you're a product leader, your product is the product team. You need to think about it that way. You need to have a roadmap for the product team, how you're going to evolve the capabilities of the roadmap. And another concept that is very product management related concept is usability. How easy is your team to work with? And if you have 5 teams and they all have 5 different types of archetypes, not archetypes, artifacts, if they have different types of documents and roadmaps and ways of engaging and ways of logging bugs and all that, it's very difficult for the organization to work with those different teams. So even though, yes, there is a little, some degree of autonomy, I prefer the term empowered, but there are also some rules that need to be followed for those to, for the whole organization to be able to work properly. So it's about trying to address misconceptions about what the role is, about how you fit in the organization, and maintaining a leadership mindset where you have no authority over anyone when you're a product manager generally, but you still need people to follow you. So you need to give them reasons to want to follow you.
Yeah, it does feel like there are lots of conversations. Certainly the PMPO thing, maybe last year, maybe earlier this year, was heating up on LinkedIn and places, I think. And it feels like certainly within tech and software product management, which is maybe a little different to product management that's been around for much longer in other organizations, the processes and the terms are starting to mature to an extent that they're a little bit more familiar across organizations, not always in a good way. Like you said, the understanding of a PO role, product owner role. But it's useful to have a bit of a shared understanding. And I think certainly when there's multiple teams, I think the way I've always thought about it is trying to minimize dependencies between the teams. I always think, you think about a large organization, massive organization. Like I did some work with Nokia with multiple business units across the globe. I sort of liken it to, you think about, you come out of one company, you think about multiple companies working together, even like the Android operating system and all the apps that run on it, all the dependencies and all the people that rely on it and things that build on top of it, etc. Android might release a software update that impacts thousands of different companies, but they'll release it in such a way that gives those companies to adapt. And I almost think if you can sort of, within a product organization, sort of think about how a successful company does it out in the wild where people don't have to use your product. And if you can build something internally that other people want to use or want to work with your team on, then that is sort of the North Star that I try and work toward. It's obviously hard to do, and there is some standardization that happens. But again, across industries, there are standardizations of even web standards, for example. In terms of the meta data on pages and things like that. But so last couple of questions maybe to wrap up. I suppose what's next for you, and maybe tying into that, what do you think about AI within product management? I say this because I read one of your LinkedIn posts talking about using, you're doing a workshop around sort of getting from a sort of fuzzy vision strategy to some fairly well-shaped vision statements using Gen AI for the last part. I mean, maybe you could talk me through that, but how do you see the role of AI within product management evolving?
I think predicting exactly what AI is going to do to any job really is quite difficult. Deloitte listed jobs that are not at risk with AI, and I think Dancer was one of them. And even that, I'm not so sure with Optimus, the robot from Tesla. So, how is AI going to impact product management, or more generally, perhaps, what should you do with AI? Well, you still find there are not many anymore, but you still find product managers who are not really using AI in their day-to-day, and this is very dangerous. There's a serious danger of being left behind. AI is going to have the same sort of impact, if not more, than microcomputers in the 80s and the internet. in the 90s. So you could ignore it, but at your own peril. Now, the next thing is that it needs to be used safely. And this is a major issue for a number of organizations who are worried about shadow AI, where people within an organization are using their phone and other devices that are not sanctioned devices to analyze documents and summarize them and do all the fun stuff that AI is good at, but they can't find a tool within their organization that does it well enough, so they do it separately on a unsanctioned system. That is very dangerous. You could lose your job over that. So be careful, because you might be in breach of contract. Simply uploading minutes of a call onto ChatGPT, that could be in breach of your contract. So that's why many organizations, especially all the large ones, have started deploying co-pilot types of tools. Some trained with their own data, and if you have that, you really should use that instead. Where there's no risk is when you're asking an AI about something, even about your own company, because you're just pulling information that the model already knows. So it's not risky, and it's always fun to ask it to do a SWOT on your company, or to apply different product management concepts to it and see what it comes back with. That works pretty well. So it's definitely a super exciting area, and predicting where it's going to go. Will we still need product managers? Well, I mean, the day you don't need product managers is the day when you don't. There will be a lot of people you won't need before you don't need product managers. But of course, I would say just embrace it. I like the concept of augmented product manager, or AI augmented product manager, where you're efficient with AI. You're able to move a lot quicker. And certainly myself as a consultant, I've seen that I'm saving a lot of time. I'm much faster in many areas using AI, and not necessarily using the greatest and best models. You can run Llama 3.2 on your Mac, for instance, and do a lot of work that way, and it works really, really well without going out of or pushing information outside on the internet. So that I think is very important. But where it's going to land, I don't know.
Yeah,
Can't wait to find out.
I think definitely as for replacing product managers, I think it will. At the moment, I definitely see it like an assistant supplementing, making us essentially more intelligent, if you think about it in those ways. But ultimately, the value that I think a product manager can bring, yes, there's going to be a little bit of execution or helping people with execution, but ultimately it's developing insights or uncovering insights that a model might not have, because the information that it's trained on doesn't have the information that you're able to dig up from somewhere else. It could be in interviews, whatever, observations, whatever. But I think that is going to be that sort of research, fact-finding, whatever you want to call it, part of the role, I think, is probably the hardest in my experience, but probably the most valuable, and maybe the hardest to replace, I would guess. But who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe not. Maybe I'll be wrong. Yeah.
One of the surveys I did on this suggested that competitive intelligence was one of the things that people thought, product managers in particular, right? They thought this is where AI could help them the most, and done in a safe way.
Yeah, safety is definitely an important part. But yeah, we've covered a lot there. Yeah, really interesting story, and I think you've touched on some really important points, which I definitely haven't thought about too much recently, but I definitely will be going forward. Certainly things like thinking about the context more in terms of the organization and the type of work. But where's the best place for people to connect with you and find out more about what you do and learn more?
So my profile is on LinkedIn. and I've got a few more resources also on my website, productcity.com. And those are the best ways to get in touch with me. But LinkedIn is probably the easiest for most people. So, and it certainly is where I do spend most of my
I've been
time.
enjoying the short video updates you're giving as well. So yeah, I would recommend anyone to follow along. So yeah, they are useful sound bites, definitely.
Thank
But no,
you.
really appreciate that. Thanks again, Cyril.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to speak with you, Liam. Always enjoy it.